and conduct directed at other members. I still see bedside visions of my friend Gabby Giffords fighting for her life after being shot at a district event, her aide already dead. I shudder to recall our own colleague, Mr. Scalise, limping to this very chamber on a cane because someone tried to assassinate him. Explosive residue still clings to a stairwell outside my district office where a pipe bomb sent by a deranged Trump supporter and handled by my staff later had to be safely detonated. The history of violence aimed at women and people of color and those who defend them are among humankind's worst chapters. You know, it's ironic that Mr. Gosar compares himself to Alexander Hamilton, and another member condoned the stylized violence portrayed by Mr. Gosar because Hamilton was actually killed by accepted high-class violence in his day in a duel. Promoting and glorifying such conduct cannot be condoned or ignored by this body. Voting to censure Mr. Gosar today firmly denounces it unequivocally. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, America is being crushed under the oppressive weight of the Democrats' greed for lust and power. They want totalitarian control over every aspect of American life, and they're ruling the people's house as if they were royalty. America is dissolving under our feet, and Democrats are worried about cartoons. In Afghanistan, Democrats led the betrayal of American honor and the abandonment of American citizens, granting control of the Afghan theater to Taliban terrorists and arming those jihadist terrorists with billions of dollars worth of American weapon systems. Our southern border control has disintegrated. American sovereignty is lost, and control of our own border completely ceded to criminal cartels. American parents are tracked like terrorists and persecuted by our own FBI because parents had the audacity to challenge government indoctrination of their children, assembling to redress their grievances at their own school boards in their own communities. American parents treated like criminals. Americans are dealing with unbelievable inflation. Families cannot afford groceries and fuel, and millions of Americans are being commanded by federal decree to choose between losing their job or kneeling to comply with an unconstitutional mandated medical procedure. And the oppressors intend to distract you with cartoons over the Speaker's podium or forever etch the words, "In God we trust." Scripture says, "A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity." I stand with my brother Paul Gosar today because I stand against oppression and persecution. Madam Speaker, I yield.
Gentleman from Florida.
I yield 1 minute to Ethics Committee member from New York.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, not since the Civil War has Congress operated under the constant threat of violence from some of its own members. But here we are. That is the behavior that Mr. Gosar has encouraged. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised, having watched so many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle incite and then express support for the insurrectionists who nearly killed us in this chamber on January 6th. We cannot let the Republican Party make Congress the only workplace in America where violence against your coworkers is not a crime but a credential. If we don't hold people like Mr. Gosar accountable, we will only embolden the worst people in our politics to bring their fever dreams to life. That is why today we are standing up for the safety of our colleagues, for the safety of Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, and for the future of our democracy. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Gentlelady from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I looked at the video enemy and was trying to figure out, I couldn't see. I'm told if you stop it frame by frame, you can see what Democrat friends are talking about. I couldn't see it. I tried to freeze frame, and I saw what I was told was supposed to be our colleague, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. I was insulted for her. If that's supposed to be her, that's really unfair. But I didn't see the violence being talked about. We should not condone violence. But the reason it's so hard to sit here and listen to the condemnation from the other side, Madam Speaker, is because when there was violence against us, there was no condemnation. My wife and I went to a speech at the White House, and I've yet to hear anybody condemn the attempted violence on us. We were chased for 2 blocks. Now, Ron Paul was on TV when he was chased because he had cameras and civil and Secret Service around him. We didn't have that. And if it weren't for a guy popping up and opening a locked door, we would have, I told Kathy, look, I'm afraid they're going to get here before this door's opened. You run on down to Pennsylvania. There are cops down there. They'll be beating on me. You just get away. Nobody's condemned all that violence that I've ever heard. This is where we ought to be able to come together. Oh, and by the way, people that committed violence, did crimes in this building need to be punished. But for many of them, the most serious crime was obstructing an official session of Congress. Well, it turns out, I didn't know it was a crime in 2016, but most of the Democratic Party committed a felony right here in this chamber by obstructing an official session of Congress, not 6 hours like January 6th, but 26 hours. Let's come together and agree on what is really violent crime.
Lady from California.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to thank Congresswoman Spear for her leadership, as well as Chairman Deutsch and the Speaker for bringing this with urgency. Representative Gosar used taxpayer-funded resources to publicize a cartoon of him killing one of our House colleagues, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, and threatening to kill the president. When Republicans don't condemn death threats against their colleagues and the president, it sends a message to the public that these threats are condoned. Their silence and misrepresentation in light of these threats speaks volumes. Now, it might be easy for Mr. Gosar to shrug this off as a joke, but it's not only members of Congress, but women and people of color throughout the country who daily deal with the threat of physical violence. This is no laughing matter. As someone who for decades has had to live with death threats, this is a moment when we need to say enough is enough. Hate speech leads to hate violence. Death threats can lead to death. Threats to murder people can lead to criminal charges. This resolution, I tell you, this is the minimum we need to do. It reinforces that this behavior will not be tolerated. So I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. Madam Speaker, as we speak, the FBI is treating parents as terrorists. The Department of Justice is getting ready to pay people $450,000 who illegally entered our country, and Democrats in Congress later this week plan to spend $2 trillion more, which we all know will only exacerbate the already 30-year high inflation. And what are they doing today? Censuring a member for a cartoon. You got to be kidding me. You have got to be kidding me. The attack, what scares me most about all this is the attack that we have seen on the First Amendment over the last year from the left, from the Democrat Party. They're attacking moms for standing up and speaking at a school board meeting. They're stopping Americans. There are still places in this country where a full congregation cannot meet on a Sunday morning, stopping Americans from exercising their First Amendment freedom of religious rights. Stopping forever, the Speaker of the House stopped Americans from petitioning their member of Congress to redress their grievances, wouldn't even let them in their own capital. And now here we go again, censoring speech. The most fundamental liberty we have is our right to speak, our right to talk, our right to communicate, and they're going after that today because they don't like freedom. You can see it. They don't like it. This is wrong. We know it's wrong. What they're doing to our colleague, Mr. Gosar, is wrong, and I hope they will have second thoughts and we will vote this down. I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida.
Yield 1 minute and 15 seconds to Ethics Committee member from Minnesota, Mr. Schultz.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I love freedom. I love George Washington. I keep this book on my desk, George Washington's Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior. I encourage every colleague in this body, every one of us, keep this on your desk, refer to it. I've heard everything talked about today: inflation, Afghanistan, schools, except the issue we're here for, a censure of a member of Congress who issued a despicable video showing the killing of a fellow member of Congress. Worst of all, most despicable of all, the object of the censure said it was to attract a new generation. Think about that. To attract a new generation of Americans. We got to do better, my friends. Come on. And to my friend from Virginia who said, if Democrats had done this, what would we do? Rest assured, my friends, every one of you, we would do the same thing, because I will never, ever, ever allow a fellow member of Congress to threaten or distribute a video showing the killing of one of us, let alone another American. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Colorado, Mrs. Boebert.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Democrat policies are so pathetic and have done so poorly that the left has nothing else to do but troll the internet looking for ways to get offended and then try to target members and strip them of their committees. This is a dumb waste of the House's time. But since the Speaker has designated the floor to discuss members' inappropriate actions, shall we? The Jihad Squad member from Minnesota has paid her husband, and not her brother husband, the other one, over $1 million in campaign funds. This member is allowed on the Foreign Affairs Committee while praising terrorists. A Democrat chairwoman incited further violence in the streets outside of a courthouse. And then the cherry on top, my colleague and 3-month presidential candidate from California, who is on the Intelligence Committee, slept with Fang Fang, a Chinese spy. Let me say that again. A member of Congress who receives classified briefings was sleeping with the enemy. This is unacceptable, and this would never be.
Time's expired. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to Ethics Committee member from Pennsylvania, Ms. Wild.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
As Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Despite Paul Gosar's history of dangerous rhetoric and despite his conduct showing him to be a dangerous extremist, he is still here in Congress. Now he has depicted himself killing one of our colleagues and the President of the United States. Never doubt that leaders' calls for violence can lead to actual violence. We've seen it throughout the world, and we've seen it right here on January 6th. Nor should the actions of his taxpayer-paid staff in creating and disseminating this vile video be ignored. They are grown adults, and they have cultivated a hostile work environment for the subject of this disgusting video and for her staff. Paul Gosar has glorified violence against a duly elected official who came here to serve her district. She nor any of us signed up for this kind of abuse. Our families should not have to live with the fear that we'll be subject to violent attacks. Paul Gosar has shown us who he is. Believe him, censure him.
Gentlelady from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Rice.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With so many real problems facing Americans created by the Biden administration, open borders, soaring gas prices, sky-high grocery bills, and our embarrassment in Afghanistan, my friends across the aisle assemble us here today to debate a cartoon. Political cartoons routinely depict violence. It's not new. Cartoons have depicted violence since there were cartoons. If you don't believe me, Google political cartoons 2021. You'll see a depiction of Joe Biden killing a Republican with a steamroller, a Republican elephant trampling voters, among many others. Now, I'll ask all of you out there to watch the Gosar cartoon that is occupying the floor of the United States Congress for over an hour today. Is it inappropriate? Yes. Childish? Of course. Stupid? Without question. But is it a threat? Absolutely not. Now, I know some members may need to seek therapy because they saw this cartoon. But is it a threat? Absolutely not. I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the Assistant Speaker, Ms. Clark.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you for yielding. It started with the white supremacist online fringe movement, and it turned into a deadly January 6th insurrection. And now I stand before you because a member of this body has once again had her life threatened, but this time by a colleague who posted a video of killing her on his official account. Think of that. And it's no coincidence that the recipients of this violence are most often women and women of color, because this violence is directly connected to sexism and racism. We cannot and must not accept this behavior. And silence and excuse is condoning it. And the excuses we have heard today, this is okay because it's highly stylized killing. It's a cartoon. It was some sort of youth outreach, are grotesque. Enough is enough. Vote for this resolution. Vote for censure. Vote for decency.
Gentlelady from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the Vice Caucus Chair, Mr. Aguilar.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the chairman. When an armed mob stormed the Capitol earlier this year, they did so under the belief that political violence was an acceptable means to an end. As leaders and as members of this body, every one of us has a responsibility to stand up and to make clear that way of thinking is unacceptable. We have a responsibility here to work together to keep our colleagues, our staff, and all of the people who work in this building safe. That goal becomes more difficult when members are making open threats of violence on social media. It is not acceptable for a member of the House to insinuate that they want to violently kill a member, and we need to directly respond to this threat. Today, we have a chance to send a strong, unified, bipartisan message against this kind of conduct. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the resolution to ensure accountability and recommit ourselves to the safety of every member and the future member of this body. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentlelady from Indiana.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, Mr. Jeffries.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I rise in strong support of this censure resolution. Inciting violence is unacceptable. Threatening to kill a colleague, the President of the United States, or any American is unacceptable. And I rise to make it clear that we have an opportunity today to choose decency over demonization, to choose civility over cynicism, to choose the rule of law over recklessly violent behavior. That is why the House of Representatives is acting and acting decisively. We cannot normalize violence today. We cannot normalize violence tomorrow. We cannot normalize violence at any point moving forward in our future. The House will hold Paul Gosar accountable for his violent and deplorable behavior. Whether the cover-up caucus likes it or not, vote yes on this censure resolution.
Gentlelady from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I yield 45 seconds to Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Gentlelady is recognized 45 seconds.
Madam Speaker, serving in public office is and should be a sacred responsibility, and that responsibility calls upon us to condemn hate when we see it. If we let hate fester and spread, it will destroy us. That's why 1 in 3 women have been attacked violently in this country and around the world. But instead of apologizing today, Republicans chose to vilify immigrants yet again, which is an outrage when the victim is herself a Latina. Remember the gunmen who traveled to El Paso to kill Mexicans after Republican politicians demonized them? Scripture says, love thy neighbor as thyself. And we must also love this institution. It is the love for this institution, the love for our fellow members, which is calling upon us to pass this resolution.
Gentleman from Florida.
I have no further speakers. I'll reserve.
Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized to close.
Thank you. I absolutely reject violence and calls for violence against any member of Congress or anyone else. But by rushing this vote to the floor today and ignoring the process, the majority is setting a precedent that I fear may not serve this institution well in the future. The majority should withdraw this resolution, and if it chooses, pursue this matter properly through law enforcement and the Ethics Committee. If the resolution is not withdrawn, then I'm going to vote no and hope at some point that the Ethics Committee will once again serve this body as it was intended. I ask my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back.
Gentleman, Florida.
Madam Speaker, none of us want to be here today revisiting the violent imagery, the vile, hateful content that Representative Gosar delighted in disseminating over his official social media accounts, material defended over and over and over today by our colleagues. Had Republican leadership acted as it should to hold their own members accountable when they breached the most basic standards of decorum and decency, we wouldn't be here. Yet the House cannot ignore Representative Gosar's conduct as Republicans would have us do. January 6th must serve as a reminder of just how important this action is we're about to take. On January 6th, violence stoked by hateful imagery and inflammatory rhetoric over social media found its way to the steps of the United States Capitol and the doors of this chamber. On that day, insurrectionists broke windows right near where I stand. Capitol police officers drew their weapons. Members bravely blocked their entrance. Heroes valiantly repelled the attack on our democracy. On this day, with our votes on this resolution, let us reject the notion that it is ever acceptable for a member of Congress to threaten the safety of a fellow member, to depict the murder of a fellow member. Let this resolution serve as an unwavering statement that never in this House should the type of horrific, violent imagery be deemed acceptable. Madam Speaker, I would ask my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to smash the partisan lens through which they view this behavior and this debate. And I would ask all of my colleagues to support safety and civility and decency by voting for House Resolution 789. I yield back the balance of my time.
Pursuant to House Resolution 795, the previous question is ordered on the resolution and the preamble as amended. The question now occurs on agreeing to the resolution. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentlelady from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, I ask for the ayes and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered, and members will record their votes by electronic device. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Rice of New York, I inform the House that Ms. Rice will vote yes on each Res 789.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Dakota rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Gonzalez from Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez will vote no on H. Res. 789.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Indiana rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Banks, I inform the House that Mr. Banks of Indiana will vote no on HRES 789. And as the member designated by Mr. Reed of New York, I inform the House that Mr. Reed will vote no on HRES 789.